Alrighty guys, welcome to video number 3 in the Advanced Selling Techniques training series. This video is going to be on the belief ladder. It's the second training video in the series. So if you haven't watched the first one, watch that first, then go to this. What we're going to cover here is the 7 beliefs your prospect has to have to buy, aka the belief ladder. So if you want this document to incorporate into your sales processes, use, etc., comment sales below. We'll give this to you. And essentially what we're going to cover is the 7 beliefs, how to use Socratic Dialogue, so asking questions. We'll talk about that, what Socratic Dialogue is and how to use it to build the 7 beliefs. And then we'll finalize and stop by, or finish off by talking about the consistency bias and why Socratic Dialogue works so well, especially when you incorporate it with the belief ladder framework. So what is the belief ladder framework? There's 7 beliefs your prospect has to have to buy. This also means there's 7 beliefs and reasons why they don't buy. So there's 7 beliefs they need to hold true to buy. But also, if you invert every single one of those, there's 7 beliefs, and I mean, any single objection you get ties back to one of 7 beliefs of why they're not going to buy. Okay? So again, I'll repeat that because it's very key. Every objection you can get is traced back to these 7 different reasons. Okay? So what our goal is to build these 7 beliefs using Socratic Dialogue, using our skilled questions before we transition to the close. So instead of us having to hard close the prospect, when we get to the end of the call, the prospect closes themselves because they hold all those beliefs to be true, and they view us as a leader and not a salesperson, okay? And so what's really cool about this is if you look at any script or any popular sales trainer or any really, really great sales training out there, any script, process, whatever, works if you cover the 7 beliefs, right? And if you look at, what Jordan Belfort does, or maybe Cardone or Jeremy, I mean, all of it, they cover these 7 things. Now, they might not explicitly say, there are 7 beliefs and I cover these 7 things, etc. But when I was coming up as a salesperson, I consumed every single training from every single person out there, period. I consumed everything I could get my hands on. And what I really realized is this is what I created to be the underlying philosophy that is true behind all of these things. So it's very, very key, and it's really going to act as the foundation of everything else we're going to do in this training series. It's all going to start this is like the base of the pyramid, okay? So what are the 7 beliefs? Pain, doubt, cost, desire, money, support, trust, right? So pain, doubt, cost, desire, money, support, trust. So let's get into actually more detail on what each of these are. So we'll start with pain, okay? So what's pain? The prospect must believe there's a gap between where they are now to where they want to be. This is pain, okay? So if there's no problem, if there's no pain, if there's no gap, there's no sale, all right? This is something I've said 100 times, but I always say it like this. Business is about solving problems, okay? Because when you solve a problem, you create value, and then people exchange the money for that value, for you solving the problem, okay? So if we know that's what business is about, if we know that is true, then sales is really just a demonstration we can solve a problem for somebody else. But, okay, knowing that, if there's no problem, then there's no what? No sale, okay? If there's no problem, there's no sale. So what that means for us and for you is that the entire conversation should be about the problem, about the gap between where they are now to where they want to be. Okay, so it's like let's put a visual on it. It's like you're searching to try to find the lost treasure. Once you find the problem, the conversation is no longer wide. It goes deep, right? We put our shovel in the ground and we start digging. All right. Now, there's 2 types of pain, right? There's a problem or an actual pain, and there's called an unfulfilled desire, both of which create the gap or can create a gap, okay? So here's the deal. A pain, and I bet you can almost pause the video and probably figure this out yourself, but I'm going to give you an easy example. So one of the companies I actually own 50% in is a stem cell company, okay? So stem cells is the product, all right? Now, we have some people who buy it because they have joint pain, right? That's literally a problem. It's something that, man, this is how I think about it. I'm trying to go from subpar to par, right? From below average to average, from pain to back to normal, okay? That is buying to fix a pain or fix a problem. It's also in NLP, they call that It's moving away from paradigm. Then there's an unfulfilled desire. So that is going from average or normal to above normal, okay? That's not moving away from, it's moving towards. So stem cells is the product. Might not be joint pain, but somebody might do an exosome blood transfusion for longevity purposes, just general maintenance. You know, hey, I get it done once every year, once every 2 years, right? Now that's what I do, right? If I go, I have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber at my house. If I go use that, I'm not doing it to try to fix a pain. I'm trying to do it for an unfulfilled desire, longevity, right? Now, these things aren't totally black and white. A lot of times people can buy for both, or there might be two things going on. There's moving away from and moving towards. There's a pain and there's an unfulfilled desire. And a lot of it can also be predicated on the prospect's perception. Like, for instance, if, in weight loss, somebody going from obese to normal is obviously fixing a pain, right? Somebody coming from normal to like bodybuilding shape is an unfulfilled desire. However, the prospect could perceive that as a pain. If, let's say, everybody around them, close to them in their friend group, is in crazy bodybuilding shape and they're actually in their peer group, in their environment, like the lowest on the totem pole. So really normal for them is actually getting a bodybuilding shape, right? So I digress. Like, now we're getting into some nuances here. Just know this can be fluid. It depends on the prospect's perception and context, but generally it's pretty straightforward. So what objection do we get if we don't elicit pain, right? If we don't listen to the gap, if we don't elicit the problem, the unfulfilled desire, what objection do we get? Remember, any objection you can get can be tied back to one of these 7 things. So what objection do we get, okay? So this one's very, very simple, okay? If the pain is not elicited, they will not see the value or need from the investment because they don't understand how you can help them, okay? And quite frankly, like, I don't even know how you would pitch if you don't understand the gap of the problem. Because again, sales is about demonstrating you can solve a problem for somebody else. So like, you can't explain how you can help somebody if you don't know what the problem or the gap is, okay? Also, the more you understand, this is a J. Abraham quote, right? The more we can understand and communicate that we understand that problem, gap, unfulfilled desire, etc., the more they trust us as an authority to lead them to fix the problem, right? So again, what objection do we get if we don't have this? It's they're not going to want it. They don't see how I can help them. Or like, you don't even know how to really pitch because again, you're just, you don't know the problem. So therefore you can't demonstrate you can fix the problem, right? The pitch is really a problem solving conversation, not a product pushing conversation. So that's number 1. Number 2 is doubt. Okay. Let's zoom in slightly. Number 2 is doubt. So doubt is what it sounds like. The prospect must believe they cannot fix the problem on their own, or attempting to do so would just waste unnecessary resources in the form of time, money, energy, reputation, etc., given the other options that are available, right? So like, for instance, we talked about in the last video, Hell Island versus Heaven Island, right? And there's the sharks, which are the objections, and then there's the bridges, right? And the bridges are the different ways we can go from, point A to point B, right? The islands represent the gap, right? So the bridges are the different ways we can cross that chasm, cross the gap. All right. Well, they might have 3 options. Okay. One of those is yours. So as a salesperson, if this is true, right? You're not trying to manipulate people for manipulative sake, but if this is true, which usually it is, we want to create doubt in those other options, right? One of those other options might be doing it themselves. Another option might be a different competitor, but et cetera. What we really want to do is we want to make sure that they see the value and believing it's possible, but also believing they need help in some way, shape, or form, or do it. Or that not getting the help will waste unnecessary resources, whether it's too much time, too much money, etc. So this brings me up to something called the buying pocket. So the buying pocket is something I learned from one of my mentors, Taylor. And the buying pocket is a place where the prospect believes that their transformation is possible, but only with your help. Okay, so why is this important? So we know what people buy, but this tells you why they'll buy from you specifically. It also helps us understand where we need to nudge the prospect, okay? So if you see the diagram down here, there's current state, desired state, right? If we go too far to the left here, they don't believe it's possible, okay? A great example is, let's say your program, I'll give you an example. Like one of our programs is a mastermind, and it's called the 8-Figure Boardroom. It helps people go from $100K a month to $1 million a month plus, right? It's all about giving you everything you need across marketing, sales, operations, fulfillment, HR, finance, legal, everything you need to go from a 7-figure company to a multiple 8-figure company, okay? So you might have somebody join that and they're at, 100 grand a month. Like they're just kind of on, just able to get in basically. They might not believe, a sales objection for them might be like, oh man, like I just don't believe that people in my industry or my market or with my business model or whatever, I just don't believe that, I can get to 8 figures. Like, it's not me. I just don't think it's possible, right? They don't believe it's possible. Okay. That's the left side. Now, how do you fix the don't believe it's possible? You fix it with some form of proof. Okay. Now, I don't want to go into the myriad of different forms of proof that there are because that's a whole training in and with itself. But, the obvious example, right, is case studies, right? Either client proof or proof yourself. Okay. Obviously ones that you can substantiate, that you're compliant, et cetera. That's something you should look into yourself. So case studies, it could be by telling stories. You can actually use logic as proof and specificity with numbers. Like the more specific something is, the more somebody can believe it's true. So logic and specificity, those are ones. There's, trusted credibility in sources and third parties, right? So like maybe, and I know this might sound a little goofy, but if you saw it in practice, you would see it actually does work. Is if, let's say, Tony Robbins has a quote around this person's specific situation, I can actually draw from that as proof. It's going to help build up what I'm saying in a form of proof, just because he's like, the industry guru of our industry, right? Like even earlier when I said that Jay Abraham says this, okay? Well, me telling you that Jay Abraham also says, if you can communicate that you understand the problem better than they can themselves, they more likely use the trusted authority, just by the factor of me tacking on Jay Abraham into that quote, right? Obviously, it holds more weight to be true. Doesn't mean you're 100% going to believe it's true, but it's just death by 1,000 cuts. It's just one thing. So in the sales side, what we really want to do is stories if we can, okay? And then, you can look up other types of proof later. That's 99% of the time, that's what we do. If they don't believe it's possible, on the left side, we want to get them into the buying bucket. Now, the right side, okay? That one is they believe they can do it themselves. Where here, what we need to do is create doubt through skill questions and reframes, okay? So it's kind of keeping people's ego in check. Sometimes the doubt's already there. We just need to kind of build it. Sometimes the doubt's already there. We don't want to add any more doubt, or we knock them over to the left, right? So again, how do you know they're in the buying pocket? Okay, they believe it's possible, but if we get to the end of the call, you're not going to hear, hey, I want to do this myself. Or, hey, I just don't even believe this is possible. So they're in the pocket when mentally getting to the end of the call, if they said something like that, you'd be like, whoa. Earlier you said this, now you're saying this, like I'm confused, right? And you can point out the incongruency. Because again, we want to create the congruency with our questions in the beginning, and then that holds weight all the way through. We'll talk about consistency bias in a second. So that's doubt. Cost. And we'll talk about, actual questions to build this later, okay? Cost. So this one is really, really probably the most important one and the hardest one to get, okay? So the prospect must believe that doing nothing, actually, before we move on from doubt, one quick thing I want to say is sometimes this is built in. Like if you're buying, like for instance, if I need a CRM software, okay, I'm not going to do that myself. You see what I mean? So like sometimes like Hyros, right, does ad attribution. Most likely the doubt's already there. Like I don't need to build that myself. So sometimes this is already built in, okay? But when you work with more like coaching offers, for instance, more intangible type stuff is very important. Okay, moving on. So cost. The prospect must believe that doing nothing is far more painful than the investment in the form of time, money, energy, reputation, etc., to fix the problem, okay? This eliminates time objections and creates urgency, okay? So pain, if they don't have pain, you get the objection to where they don't want it, they don't see how it can help them. Doubt, you get the objection, I'm just going to do it myself. Cost, you get the objection, hey, let's circle back in 3 months. Hey, let me think about it next week, send me something. It's always uncertainty-based objections or time-based objections or lack of an urgency, right? Cost is something where when you really have it, that's when you get the decision on the call, or you at least get an indication from the prospect that they're promptly going to move forward in the next step of the sales process. Like, if you're not doing a one-call close, or that's not impractical for your industry, which is fine, it's a clear indication that they have the initiative and urgency to take that next step, right? That's when they have the cost, okay? So if you see this kindergarten drawing I have here, the current and future pain of doing nothing has to be far greater than the pain in the form of time, energy, money, attention, etc., into your offer investment for the prospect to take action, right? So if you see this, here's perceived pain is on the y-axis here. So this is the pain of time and money of the investment, right? Because there's a certain pain, okay, and consequences of having to, let's say, invest with a coach, hold you accountable. You're going to have to go through some content. You're going to have to show up to calls. You're going to have to make time in your schedule. You're obviously going to have to make the investment. Maybe you put it on a credit card. Okay, you got to make payments. Okay, budget's going to be tighter. Like, there's pain associated in some way, shape, or form of buying anything. If it's an Advil and it's an aspirin to alleviate you from a headache, yeah, it's not very much. And the cost of not doing it's way higher, right? That's why you just take the pill. But there's always a form of, if something costs something, or it takes time, or it has any side effects, okay, there's some sort of pain associated with your offer. You should get clear with what that is. And then also through offer engineering, you can limit that, right? That's like a big part of what Alex Hormozi talks about in the value equation, right? Is really trying to minimize time delay and minimize effort, right? And energy requirement, okay? So this is your offer, right? But this is the current and future pain of doing nothing. And this not only has to exceed the pain of your offer, okay? The pain requirement of your offer. It not only has to exceed this, the alternative, but it also has to exceed their action threshold. This is something popularized by Jordan Belfort, right? So it's not just enough for it to be more than the pain and time and energy and attention for your offer, right? It's not just enough. It has to exceed a threshold to where they're like, I need to do it now, okay? So we'll talk about how to build that later. But again, what's really key here, again, if you don't have this, they're not going to have urgency. Okay, let's circle back next quarter. Hey, I don't think we're going to make it in our budget this month. It's always objections like that, right? Biggest question I get is what to do about that. It's building cost on the front end. And you'll know when you have cost, if at the end they said, hey, let's circle back to this next month, you'd be like, whoa. I mean, okay, I totally hear you, but earlier you were saying this, now you're saying this, like, what's really going on? Like, you go call them out for being incongruent. And when you have each of these 7 beliefs, if you get the objection at the end, you can call them out for being incongruent. If you can't do that, you don't have it. And what's funny is, if you have the ammunition in the form of their words in which they told you, to where at the end you go call them out for being incongruent, if you have that, you'll never get the objection because of what's called consistency bias. And again, we'll talk about that later. So, been getting a little off track here. Let's move on. Desire. So the prospect must believe that solving the problem or the gap would yield a better future situation than what they do now, right? So here, we want to know what they want, why they want what they want, a number assigned to what they want, and then how getting that thing would impact some other areas of their life, right? And so, for instance, if you're selling, we'll use high risk, like an ad attribution software. Okay, we know the desired state is more profitability, more ROAS, and be able to scale your ads further, right? But a really great skilled salesperson, if they understood the person's business, will also be able to attach that desired state of more profitability, et cetera, to other things that they would be allowed to do in their business that are kind of indirect just because they got this, right? Which obviously, if you have more profit, you could hire more staff, you could be able to just, quite frankly, spend more to acquire a customer, which makes your ads actually even more powerful. You could also have a lot more data on which campaigns, which ad sets are actually getting you the best customers, which allows you to narrow down your customer success and really actually get your clients better results. Like, that's a great example, right? So when it's like you want to start stacking, you're like, yeah, it's okay, it would be add profitability, but it's also, it would raise CPA. It's also, it could actually increase client success. It's all like, it also maybe easier to train your media buyers, right? So it's like you start stacking these results in a sense that they're going to get both directly and indirect. And that's when it makes it a no-brainer, okay? When all those things have synergy. So money. So money is the belief, probably as it sounds, that they have the resources and willingness to solve the problem, okay? So if they don't have the resources, right? Like physically they don't have the resources, that's a condition, not an objection. So what I mean by that is if like later in this series, you'll learn something called the open wallet technique. It's the basis of how I handle financial objections. So it'll be in that video. There's also a few videos on my channel that are very popular if you just sort, where you can see how I handle financial objections. They're actually the most popular ones on the channel. So I do something called the open wallet technique. Long story short, what that is getting them to tell you how much money is in their bank account and how much credit they have, and do it honestly. Now, you might hear that and you might be like, whoa, that sounds invasive. That sounds high pressure. That sounds this and that. Well, part of the reason I teach sales, I'm good at this and we've gotten a lot of people results and I make my living here, is that, you know, if you do it with the right persuasion and the right rapport building and trust building, they tell you the exact amounts and it's totally cool. It's not high pressure. It's not weird. It's usually only weird if you make it weird. So anyways, if we do the open wallet technique and they tell us in their checking account is $457 and their credit score is 550, okay? That is a condition, not an objection, right? Like they really want to do it, but quite frankly, physically right now, they do not have the resources. Now, sure, they could sell, you know, their freaking couch on eBay or something like that. I really don't recommend, you know, in my mind, like when people say, oh, there's no true financial objections, there's only excuses. I think that's a great thing for like you and your personal development for yourself or maybe your team or something like that. I think for selling in a way that's ethical, in a way that is going to keep you out of trouble and it's compliant, you know, I don't think you should be telling your salespeople that there's no such thing and, you know, hey, like tell them to sell their car. Like, I mean, come on, like that's just stuff that's going to end you up in jail, quite frankly. So, yeah, I just, you know, again, if they don't have the physical resources to do it right now or in the near future and they have a healthy situation and you have a clear idea what that situation is, I call that a condition, not an objection. Now, if they don't have the willingness, that's where we get an actual objection. And what happens is that is really ties back to cost. So I'll give you an example. The story I always tell is I was coaching a guy who was a dating coach. He was talking to a lawyer. The lawyer was making $225K a year. The lawyer was really busy. And the lawyer wasn't getting the dates that he wanted and having the sex with women that he wanted because he was so busy and, you know, he had no game, whatever it was, right? So the guy's going along throughout the call. He's like, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, I want to do it. Sounds good. The dating coach dropped, you know, $5,800 as the price point at the end of the call. You could tell this guy kind of thought it would be good to be like, you know, $300 a month or something, right? And the guy had the resources, obviously, but he wasn't willing. He's like, that's too much for me. Now, why would he say, oh, that's too much for me, which is a shadow money objection? The reason he says that is because of up here, right? In his mind, the cost of the offer was actually higher, much higher than the cost of just doing nothing. Now, that's not actually in reality, that's his perception, right? So what we learn through the training and the rest of this video series is how through asking the right skilled questions, we can actually exceed that, okay? So, support. This is the belief that people around them, close to them, generally spouse and partner, but it could be team, board, CFO, you know, whoever, right? Project manager, will support them in fixing the problem, right? So generally what we talk about most times is spouse or some form of business partners, all right? So they have to, around them, have people who support them in fixing the problem, right? Nobody's going to buy if they think they're going to make a decision and then have conflict with somebody else right afterwards, right? Obviously, if it's a spouse situation, money's really tight, or if it's a 50-50 business partner situation, and this is something to where they really need the person's input on. That's not always, but sometimes maybe it's a board, they got to decisions approved by the board or a CFO. Or like one time I had a case where I wanted to buy this program because I just buy everything. The easiest sale of all time. And I buy everything. And I wanted to buy this thing, but I wasn't going to implement it. So before I bought it, I was like, hey, let me just like have the people who are going to implement this review this sales call just so I can make sure they're going to show up and be ready and be present, et cetera, to, implement it. Because I don't want to, it was $25K. I was like, I don't want to invest $25K if, we're going to get this help. And, I'm not going to have people who are serious about doing this because I'm not going to do it. And when I went to talk to them, they said, they actually kind of talked me out of it. And so, long story short, what really the objection, the only objection on that particular sales call that I was on, I was the prospect, was that my team, they didn't have the support, right? That support belief wasn't there. Now, if I would have been on that call and had that belief that yes, they're going to implement and they actually crush it, they're fucking super excited, I would have bought credit card. Boom, one call close. Cool. So that obviously works for what I just mentioned, but generally you're going to see this as spouse and partner and stuff like that. So we'll talk about how to handle that later. Now, trust. This is very, very cool. Trust is really, they believe in your specific method of fixing the problem, right? So what is really new, different, unique, superior, better, etc., of the way you fix this problem compared to the rest of your competition, right? So what objection does this eliminate? I have been burned before. Oh, I've tried something like this. Oh, I don't see how this is different. Oh, I talked to somebody yesterday who does the same exact thing that you do, and this person's prices are lower, right? It eliminates the competition again. So you remember doubt. Doubt is a bridge burner, right? To where we're kind of getting rid of the do-it-yourself bridge. Trust is actually eliminating a lot of the competition, and we'll do this later. I'll show you in the script. We do this through something called solution-based questions. Okay? So let me just give you a little more depth on trust. Is essentially, it's all about your method, right? So like remember, there's Hell Island and there's Heaven Island. Trust is your specific methodology of crossing, Hell Island to Heaven Island, of closing the gap. It's your specific methodology, right? So for instance, there could be weight loss, but what are the methods? Ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, there's flexible dieting, there's the carnivore diet, there's vegan, there's pescatarian, there's Mediterranean, there's Atkins, right? So like you could see, there you go. In terms of getting in shape, there's working out, getting in shape, cardiovascular health, spinning, there's lifting weights, there's CrossFit, there's yoga, Pilates. I mean, you get these things, right? So those are the methods of crossing, right? So those could be different bridges in and within itself through the right questions, and also very, very important of how we pre-pitch, what it's called, and how we pitch. What we do is we really sell them on the belief that our specific method is the best method of crossing the chasm, right? And so, again, the way to think about this is there's 2 sales you make on every sales call, and really in any sort of sale, generally. Okay, now a super low value transactional sales, sometimes it's just the lowest cost provider. Like if I'm selling rice, it probably doesn't matter. But generally, especially with stuff that we sell, like if it's complex enough to need a sales call, almost every single time this is true, but it also applies to even just direct a sales page, like no sales calls. There's 2 sales in every product. There's a sale on the method and a sale on the product. Okay? So ClickFunnels, right? If you guys know ClickFunnels, Russell Brunson. If you watch his talks at events, particularly 10X GrowthCon 2, it's on YouTube. If you watch that talk and you break it down, 80 to 90% of the presentation is not about ClickFunnels, actually. It's about why funnels is the best way to get new customers online. Okay? So he doesn't sell you on ClickFunnels. He sells you on the idea that funnels is the best way to get customers online, right? It's the fastest, most effective, whatever. It's way better than websites and, other methods. And if you believe that to be true, then naturally you buy ClickFunnels as a byproduct of that belief. Okay? So again, like Russell Brunson, this has been called different things in marketing from the beginning of time. Russell in his book particularly calls it the domino belief. It's like you want to believe your method is the fastest, most effective way to get result, and the only way to obtain that result is through product, right? That's really that belief, that one belief that if they believe to be true, they buy, right? So we want to do the same thing on a sales call, is we want to figure out what is our specific method, because what's great too is selling them on the method is not salesy at all. You can hard sell somebody on a method. It's not salesy. It comes off like education, belief breaking education, okay? But if they believe that that's true, they're going to buy your product as a byproduct, right? Another example, I sell sales certification for high-ticket closing, right? If somebody believes that the best way to create income and financial security for their family is not doing Amazon FBA and e-commerce and drop shipping and whatever else, but is actually doing high-ticket closing, if they believe that's the best method, they're probably going to buy my product as a byproduct of that, right? Cool. So hopefully that made sense. How do we build the beliefs? Socratic dialogue. So think of these beliefs like a checklist, all right? If we check all the boxes before we transition to the close, they're going to buy, okay? We'll talk more about how to actually do this in the later parts of the training, especially my note-taking method is very, very good for helping understand and making sure you get down all of the 7 things before you transition into what you're going to talk about, okay? So how do we actually build these beliefs? We do it through what's called Socratic dialogue, okay? So for our purposes, we're going to define, and this is again for our purposes only, we're going to define Socratic dialogue as the process of asking skilled questions to help them come to the conclusion that you want them to, but as if it's their own idea. So I'll repeat that. Socratic dialogue is the process of asking skilled questions to help them come to the conclusion that you want them to, but doing it in a way where they believe it's their own idea, right? So consistency bias. Consistency bias is what makes Socratic dialogue so powerful, okay? So here's the thing. And it's the number one thing that Robert Cialdini talks about in his book, Influence. Number one thing. So when you get prospects expressing that they hold the 7 beliefs, not only are they telling you those things, but more importantly, they're telling themselves, okay? And again, Robert Cialdini talks about an influence, and that's probably one of the best books on actual human psychology of influence. It's based on research and studies in particular. He tells you that the number one highest driver of human behavior is to appear consistent, is the need, the want, the desire to appear consistent. And in our case, it's consistent with something they just told you like 10 minutes ago, okay? So when you use Socratic dialogue in conjunction with the belief ladder, it'll simply feel incongruent for the prospect to not move forward at the end. That's how you create an objectionless close, okay? Because again, like you know when you have these 7 beliefs, if at the end of the call, it's like, man, any objection they would give me, I have this ammo of things that they told me written down right in front of me to be like, whoa, okay, I totally hear you're saying this. Earlier you just said this right here, help bring me up to speed, what's going on. But if you have that ammunition, you'll never have to use it because of the consistency bias. Every once in a while that happens, but if we just want to go in with the right ammunition to handle any objection based on what they said, not what we think, what they said, their words are gold, our words are crap. Their words are gold. If we go into the close with that, we'll never have any objections. Because, and we could have logistics, right? But we'll never have objections because they want to appear consistent, okay? So again, if you look at most great closers, while they certainly can handle objections, and I do think that's actually very underrated. Yes, like handling objections, and it's not even as much great closers. It's not about handling objections. Like they're not getting these crazy objections and it's like all this looping and hard closing. Sure, that they can do that. But generally it's like handling real concerns to get the deal done. So yes, they are great at that, but what they're even better at is on the front end, going in with the right ammunition, right? Doing discovery and the question asking in such a way where we get all 7 beliefs and any objection possible, we can handle it with their words, not our words, Because if we do that, we're not going to handle objections at the end. We might handle logistics, but not objections, okay? And quite frankly, if we did get an objection, we're going to be able to handle it super well because we can just point out what they said, not us. And then usually call out after that, hey, look, like, what's the real reason? It's probably because there's a little bit of nervousness. There's a little bit of fear, and that's okay. Let me coach you through that, so we can go through that. Cool. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's it for this training. We'll see you in the next training.